Welcome to another episode of A Breath of Fresh Jacob, where I had something cool to say here as an intro, and then I forgot what I was going to say. Today's question comes from HyperCole64 and asks, what's your viewpoint on narratives in video games? Alternatively, what do you think makes a great narrative for a video game specifically? So this is two questions. You broke the rules! Again, that's an interesting question. What's my viewpoint on narratives in video games? We're going to tackle this one at a time. I think that narratives are one of the most important parts of video games. Now, that's not to say that in order for a video game to be good, it has to have a narrative. You can have a narrative in a game and it still be bad, and you can also have a game without a narrative and it be good. I do think that almost every game that has a narrative is better for that narrative. Like, if you take a game and you remove the narrative, it makes it objectively worse. It's not always the case. There are some games with some pretty shit narratives out there. But I do think that overall, narratives are a good thing for games to have, and that games are definitely better for them. To get into a little more detail about that, video games aren't the only pieces of media to have narratives, of course. You have movies, you have TV shows that also have narratives. And this is where I think video games really shine, is that they can do stuff that movies and TV shows simply can't. It is a more interactive medium. It's also a way for the video game developers and writers to create a story that can do more than a movie or a TV show. And I think one of the most important parts of that isn't just the narrative itself, it's actually the characters within that narrative. Characters are more important than the narrative they find themselves in. You could have a game with a fantastic story, but if you don't have any characters to carry that story forward, what's the point? On the other hand, if you have characters without a good narrative, the characters themselves can still shine. Not always. Again, a good narrative enhances both the game and the characters within it. But I feel that the characters really make a game, especially when the game is very heavy on narrative. As an example, Mass Effect. The game has a great story, and it has a lot of interesting plot points, a lot of really cool things that the narrative makes better, and the game plays into the narrative as well. Even your combat abilities are a bit of lore that is wrapped into the narrative, and that's really fascinating. But imagine how much worse Mass Effect would be if you had generic characters. Who would care? And yet, when you think Mass Effect, you think of the squad mates. You think of Rex. You think of Tali. You think of Garrus. I could sit here and name almost all of them, except for Caden and Ashley, that are fantastic characters. But imagine how much worse Mass Effect would be if you had generic characters. When you think of Mass Effect, or 2 or 3, your thought isn't, oh yeah, there's that one mission where we go to that place and do that thing. No, you think of your squad mates, the interactions you have with those squad mates, their growth as characters, and how your character grows because of them. I feel like that's a really important part of narrative. I know I'm sitting here talking about Mass Effect a lot. I can't help it. Mass Effect's fantastic. If you haven't played it, go play it. I'm actually going to completely ignore Mass Effect for this next point, because if you've played it, you'll know. Another thing that I think that video games can do really well, and this is to your second question, alternatively, what do you think makes a great narrative for a video game specifically? I think things with multiple endings that are done well, not Mass Effect, imagine, are really good. They are things you can't really get in a TV show or a movie. When you have a non-linear story, or a story that changes based on your decisions, it creates an unprecedented way to connect with the game, knowing that what's happening isn't just a story, it's happening because of you. It's your fault that everything's good or bad. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to use Mass Effect as an example for all this, but when I think narrative, I think story games, and I think about characters, and I think about Mass Effect, and now I can't stop thinking about Mass Effect, and it's all your fault, Cole. I hope you're happy. But multiple endings are where a game can truly shine, especially when it's not just at the end of the game, pick the left road or the right road. It's more about these tiny little things that happen throughout the game shape what's going on. And it doesn't have to be Mass Effect. I know. I'm sorry. I keep coming back to Mass Effect, but let's look at, you know what? Let's look at OG Silent Hill for PS1. At a certain point in the game, you can do a side quest that you can completely miss if you don't explore around, and that changes the ending of the game that you get. But you learned more about the world you were in, and your reward for that... Oh, fuck, I'm doing this again. Your reward for that is more lore, more plot about what's going on in this town you found yourself in. On top of that, you get a different ending. And also, there's a place in the game where you find this liquid in the floor, and if you scoop it up in a bottle, then that also changes the ending that you get. So technically there's 4 endings depending on whether you did this particular side quest and whether you grabbed this goo off the ground. That can change your experience of the game. Another example of how multiple endings can be done really well. Give me a second to think of one that isn't Mass Effect. Look at Heavy Rain. That game is a game.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
And you know, it did more than just Heavy Rain. Now, all of those games that are like that, Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, Detroit Become Human, especially Detroit. Oh my God. You can get so many different endings because you make so many decisions along the way. And those as narratives are fantastic. You can do multiple playthroughs and you get to see how things could have gone differently and what the tiniest little decision in one place could have profound effects later in the game. And you can't have that with movies. You can't have that with TV shows. But it's also important to remember that without a good core narrative, it all falls apart. Because look at Detroit Become Human. If it didn't have a gripping, centralized story that everything kind of revolves around, it would all fall apart. But also think of the characters themselves. When you think of Detroit, what do you think of? You think of Connor, and how cool he was. You think of Hank, and how awesome he was, right? You think of these characters. You think of Marcus. You think of Kara. You think of all these cool characters that you got to meet and explore, and you got to make decisions for them. And not only did that change how the game played out and how the narrative expanded, but it also changed how those characters developed. You got to breathe your own personality in them and watch them grow from that. It's like sowing the seeds of a garden, watching the plants grow. It is an incredible experience because the narrative was well crafted and the characters were well crafted as well. You can tell a good story, but again, the characters really make it, at least in my opinion. You can also look at things like Undertale and the ending that you get and how the world changes around you and how people in the world perceive you changes depending on your actions. If you go through and kill everything, everybody's terrified of you and just runs away. If you just go through the game and you don't kill anything, you make friends. You get to see cool characters here, cool characters there, and you get to see how these monsters were actually just normal people. You get to treat them with respect. They treat you with respect. Or you can just be a dick and kill everyone, and it sucks the life out of the game. Now, interestingly enough, that narrative is written in such a way that you don't control the narrative controls you. A genocide run, as fun as the fight with Sans is, spoilers, getting there is boring. It is so boring just running around each area and killing everything. You're being punished for being an asshole. That's because the narrative is guiding you. You're not guiding the narrative. And that's an interesting duality to that. And I find that in and of itself interesting. You can also look at something like Until Dawn. That one has multiple endings, and again, you choose like the left path or the right path, and you're constantly making choices like that. Drastically affects the game. Stuff like that is very fascinating. And again, the narrative is what holds it all together. It's the glue that you hope holds all these characters together. And a lot of these games, it does really, really, really well. And I've always found that really fascinating. I know I'm kind of blathering on, and I'm kind of deviating away from like the narrative thing to talk about games that have really good stories and really good characters and that are really fun to watch your decisions change things. But it's just kind of where my brain went. Okay, cool. So anyway, that's probably enough of me blathering on about games that aren't Mass Effect. So yeah. Thanks for watching. Do the things, the likes, and please share this with your friends.
I'm lonely.
And just remember, Oompa Loompa Doopity Doo. We'll see you next time. I hate myself. Have fun with that.